Hello, BookTube. One of the things that I like to do when I'm trying to learn about a new historical period is to seek out historical fiction for a couple of reasons. One is I just find it more entertaining than a dry history book. And then the second reason is that the way my brain is wired, I tend to remember historical fiction more than I remember a history book. My brain just latches onto stories like that. So recently, I've been on a quest to learn more about ancient Mesopotamia, and you've probably seen some of those videos on this channel. I've been reading about Babylon and Assyria, etc. And I decided to Google historical fiction about Babylon. And I didn't find a lot, which is not surprising because, our historical records from ancient Babylon are fragmentary. There's not a lot for a historical novelist to work from. But one of the things I did find is whenever I Googled historical fiction about Babylon, this book kept getting recommended, Gilgamesh the King by Robert Silverberg. Now, as it turns out, this book is actually not about Babylon. So, thank you very much, Google. But it did look interesting. It's the story of Gilgamesh rewritten as a historical novel. So Gilgamesh was a famous epic during the time of Babylon, but Gilgamesh actually takes place in the city of Uruk, U-R-U-K, which is one of the city-states that predates the Assyrian and Babylonian empires much earlier in Mesopotamian history. But anyways, it's by Robert Silverberg, who I've never heard from before, but according to the book cover here, and according to Wikipedia, he's a famous science fiction author. But this is not science fiction. This is Robert Silverberg trying his hand at something different. As he wrote in the introduction, the fact that he was a famous science fiction author caused this book some marketing problems when it came out in the 1980s. And apparently it didn't do very well. He's written this introduction for, what version is this? This version came out in 2000. Oh, hold on. The introduction is written for the age of the internet. It talks about how much easier it would have been to market the book if it came out nowadays with the internet. I don't see a date on the introduction though. Apologies. Anyways. Not usually a historical fiction writer, but he's trying his hand on this. And the idea is to take the Gilgamesh epic about Gilgamesh the King and rewrite it as if it was historical. There is some evidence that Gilgamesh may have been a historical king before the epic was created around him. So taking the stories of the epic and going back and making it historical. I should say right at the outset, I'm not a huge fan of this approach. I do like it when modern writers try and go back to the old myths and rewrite them as novels, but I want the supernatural to stay in there. I don't want I don't want it to just be about a normal guy. That's boring. I've read a few books like this in the past. The one that springs to mind, which I've reviewed on this channel, is The Golden Fleece by Robert Graves, which was also an attempt to retell the legend of the Golden Fleece, but stripping it of much of its supernatural elements and making it just about a bunch of guys on a quest to encounter things, but without all the supernaturalness of it. This is very much in this vein, and it is structured around the Epic of Gilgamesh, but it retells it in a way that makes it more plausibly historical, stripping it of its supernatural elements, and unfortunately, in my opinion, a bit more boring. So I would be totally up for an author rewriting the Epic of Gilgamesh as a modern novel, but I want all the fantastical elements to be in there. You take away the fantastical elements, and what are you left with? The story just becomes a lot more boring. Anyways, the Epic of Gilgamesh. I've reviewed the Epic of Gilgamesh before on this channel, The version I reviewed on this channel actually contained not only the Akkadian Epic of Gilgamesh, which was the version used in Babylon and Assyria, but also some of the Sumerian poems which preceded it. So Sumerian was the language before Akkadian, and we can see through the fragments of the Sumerian poems that we have how this epic had evolved in the Middle East over time, in Mesopotamia over time. Excuse me. Yes, this book, though it has the Akkadian Epic of Gilgamesh as its backbone, it also incorporates elements from the Sumerian poems as well, in an interesting way. And I have to confess, the proper Epic of Gilgamesh, the Akkadian epic, I felt like I remembered fairly well. So as I was reading this, I knew exactly what was going to come. I could see how things were lining up with the Akkadian Epic of Gilgamesh. I no longer have a copy with me. It was a library copy that I read last year, a year and a half ago now, I believe. The Sumerian poems I didn't remember very well. Some of them not at all. So when I finished this book and I was doing some research on Wikipedia, etc., and was seeing how some of the Sumerian poems had fit in, then I appreciated a bit more what the author was doing. I thought, oh, okay, that's clever, the way we're mixing together the stories of the Sumerian poems with the proper Epic of Gilgamesh. The Sumerian poems are mostly shoehorned in around the edges, but in a way that works here. But one of the consequences of that is that we get to about 170 pages in before we get introduced to, let's see, I think it's 170. Yeah, about 170 pages in before we get 170 pages in. But before we really get started with the Epic of Gilgamesh as we know it in the Akkadian form. It's the book is well written in terms of a prose style, and again, I guess Robert Silverberg was a famous author. Apparently, I'd never heard of him before this, but apparently he's famous in science fiction circles. Yeah, so the prose is well written. I've got a couple problems with that, and I'll just get my problems listed off first. The characters, what they do doesn't always make sense, and this is, I guess, a problem with maybe historical fiction, because the story is already predetermined. You can't let the characters do what would seem natural for the characters to do. You have to have the characters do what the legend says they're going to do, even though you're thinking that's not really what that character would do here. The thing that glares out at me the most is at the beginning of this book. Oh, spoilers, by the way. Gilgamesh is a young prince who's got royal blood. It becomes there's some sort of rumor going around about him that he's talked about his ambitions for the throne. So he's got to flee to the neighboring kingdom of Kish, where he's taken in by the king there and stays with the king, and that king becomes like a second father to him. He later finds out that the whole thing had been manufactured by the priestess of Ishtar, or Iana, as she's called in this version, and the king of Kish himself, in order to have the king of Kish have influence over Gilgamesh, and for diplomatic reasons for the king of Kish, so that he's got some sort of control over the Gilgamesh when Gilgamesh becomes king of Uruk. Okay, so far so good. But then immediately when Gilgamesh becomes king, Aga, the king of Kish, demands a tribute from Gilgamesh, which he knows Gilgamesh is not going to want to pay, provoking a war between the two of them. And you think, well, what was the point of that? I mean, if he's just going to start straight out demanding an exorbitant tribute and then fighting the war, I mean that doesn't seem like the natural conclusion of the plan, right? The natural conclusion of the plan would be he's got Gilgamesh, who's a sympathetic ally. He can get Gilgamesh to support his foreign policies, or at least Gilgamesh is not going to interfere in his areas of influence. But to go through all that to get a sympathetic king on the throne of Uruk and then just to immediately provoke a war with him just doesn't make sense. Now this war between Uruk and Kish, or between Gilgamesh and the king Aga, this again comes from one of the early Sumerian poems. So there is a basis for that in the legend, but there's a few other incidents in here that have bases in the legend. Gilgamesh removing an Anzu bird and other demons from a sacred tree of Iana, the Ishtar goddess. But in the Epic of Gilgamesh, Gilgamesh is interacting directly with the goddess Ishtar, or as she's known in the older Sumerian poems, Iana, I believe. And this novel uses the name Iana to refer to that goddess. But because this is a version that's historically plausible, the actual goddess does not appear. The priestess of Iana appears, and there's a belief that the priestess is the goddess incarnate. So that's how they get around that. When Gilgamesh is talking to Iana, it's actually not the god, it's the priestess who's believed to be the goddess incarnate. Now, on the one hand, that again feels like a little bit boring. Like I want the actual gods and goddesses to appear in this story. I want it to be epic, not boring and historically plausible. But, that's the kind of book that Robert Silverberg had wanted to write. And to be fair, as I mentioned in talking about Before the Muses, an anthology of Akkadian literature, it does mention in this book that the priestess was believed to be the goddess incarnate, and in this book, talked about in a previous video, they have some of the rituals that the priestess was supposed to say to the king, and there's ceremonies like that in here. So, okay, I guess that there's precedent established for that. Then if you know the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Epic of Gilgamesh starts off with the gods introducing Enkidu, who is kind of an animal or wild man who runs with the animals, to be a rival to Gilgamesh because Gilgamesh is exhausting the people too much. And in this book, it does follow that. In a way that is stretching, I guess, the mandate of this book, right? So it's supposed to be historically plausible. And, I guess Enkidu, he's not he doesn't really have any supernatural powers per se, but he's portrayed as being a little bit more than human. The way he can run with the gazelles, the way he just kind of seems to be come out of nowhere and be put there by the gods. And it follows the epic insofar as he's disrupting the local hunters. They get a prostitute to lie with him, and this causes him to be civilized. And then the beasts no longer want to run with them, and he loses his ability to run with the gazelles. Then, just as in the Epic of Gilgamesh, Enkidu travels to the city and fights Gilgamesh, and they have like a epic fight. And then at the end of the fight, they decide that they are best friends and brothers from now on, just like in the epic. So I'm reading this and I think, okay, well, this isn't so bad. Maybe we are actually going to follow the epic with all its supernatural weird things. And then they decide to go kill the demon, who I forget his name, it starts with an H, who lives in the cedar forest. And again, so far so good, but then they get there and there's not actually a demon. There's these kind of boiling springs in the forest, which are releasing steam. And Enkidu said, well, this is how the demon chooses to manifest himself. He's a demon, so he can choose any form he wants. So Enkidu and Gilgamesh defeat the demon by just plugging up these hot springs and flooding them with water from the stream. And that's how the demon is defeated in this version. And there's some sort of line that's saying, and eventually the tale got exaggerated about how we fought him with our swords and spears and hacked off his head. But that's not actually how it happened. How it happened was he was in his form as vapors and we defeated him that way. Something like that. So, here's where I started to get disenchanted with the book, because I thought, first of all, that's no fun. I want the real fight with the demon. I want them to actually fight an actual demon with their spears and their, cut off the demon's head, the whole slaying the monster thing. But second, when Enkidu and Gilgamesh think that they're slaying a demon by plugging up the hot springs, it makes them look stupid. So, up until this point, Gilgamesh has been portrayed as quite a shrewd character, somebody who's routinely, I was going to say routinely one step ahead of everyone else, but that's not true, actually. He is being manipulated by the other characters, like I said before, Aga and Iana. But he is our hero. He does seem to always come out on top, and he does seem to have like this sense about him, about where to go, what to do, how to achieve glory. And now he's just looking like a superstitious, primitive yokel. That part I wasn't a big fan of. Then they get back, and if you know the Epic of Gilgamesh, you know that the next plot point is Ishtar, or Iana, proposes that Gilgamesh become her consort. Gilgamesh refuses because he knows that all of Ishtar's consorts have come to bad ends. All her lovers come to bad ends. So in retaliation, she sends down this ferocious bull that Gilgamesh and Enkidu have to fight. So that's in here kind of. It's not Ishtar. It's the priestess who's Ishtar, supposed to be Ishtar incarnate. So okay, a little bit less interesting when it's not the actual goddess. And then the bull is just one of the sacred bulls from the temple that she lets out. So it's not like a bull from heaven. It's just an ordinary bull that they fight and subdue. But okay, it's kind of interesting. Then, I guess, spoilers for the Epic of Gilgamesh. Enkidu dies, and Gilgamesh goes on a quest for immortality, where he's trying to find the human who survived the flood. So in Akkadian mythology, just like as in biblical mythology, the flood is a big point, and separating the humanity before the flood and the civilizations before the flood, and then everything's wiped out, and then there's after the flood. And there's one guy who survived the flood. His name varies depending on the translation or depending on which story you're reading. But Gilgamesh is going to meet him to see about the secrets of immortality, because the gods made him immortal after he survived the flood. So, in the original epic, this is interesting for a few different reasons. One is, you get the visual imagery of all this stuff happening, the flood, the ark. But it's also like a bit of a crossover event, because the Epic of Gilgamesh is very important, the flood story is very important, and they have a little crossover in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Also, on the way over there, in the original epic, Gilgamesh meets strange people like the Scorpion Men and stuff like that. So, I probably don't need to tell you, it's a lot more boring in this version. Gilgamesh does set out trying to seek the person who survived the flood, but it turns out it's all a story. It never really happened. Various people try to tell Gilgamesh this along the way, that it's not real, it's just a story. Gilgamesh refuses to believe it, and again, this has the effect of making Gilgamesh look stupid. Like, there are some savvy people in this world who understand the difference between myths and reality. Gilgamesh is not one of them. He's one of the stupid, credulous cretins who believes all these stupid myths in the context of this novel. Gilgamesh does eventually meet a holy man, but it turns out that there was no flood that covered the whole earth. It was just a local flood, and somebody had the foresight to move to the high ground when this local flood was happening. He did not get granted immortality, etc., etc. So the Scorpion Men are not really Scorpion Men. They're just desert tribesmen who are wearing strange clothes, etc. So, yeah, and I know that this is the book Robert Silverberg wanted to write. And, there's a rule of reviewing. Review the book you read, not the book you wanted to read. So, if I was going to be a fair reviewer, I would try to review this on its own merits. But, at this point, I'm just losing patience here. I'm like, this is boring. Why am I reading this? Why are we doing the epic of... if we wanted to do Gilgamesh the King as a historical figure and make up some stories about him building an empire or fighting Kish or gradually subduing the city-states around him or something like that, we don't really know anything about the historical Gilgamesh, but something historically plausible, maybe. Fine, that could be an interesting historical novel. And if we wanted to rewrite the Epic of Gilgamesh as a modern-day fantasy novel and just incorporate all the fantastic elements from everything into it, fine, that could be a really great fantasy novel. And I should pause to say, I think that book is out there. I think there are people who have attempted that. So maybe I'll try and track down some of those books from my library next, because according to Google, it looks like some of those books are out there. That might be interesting. But to just take the storyline from the Epic of Gilgamesh and just make it a lot more boring, that doesn't sound fun to me. And by the end of this book, and because I had read and at least for the Akkadian version of the Epic of Gilgamesh remembered it fairly well, and knew what the plot points were going to be. It was just like, oh, okay. I can't wait to see how this plot point becomes really boring. And you go through it that way. The last 100 pages or so of this book, I was just bored. So I don't know if I could give it a strong recommendation. On the other hand, I mentioned at the top of this video that one of the reasons I like historical fiction is it helps me remember stuff better. I do feel now, because of this book, that I have a stronger idea what the cities in ancient Mesopotamia were at this time. Kish, Uruk, Elam. I'm not sure how long that will stay in my memory, but it's helping me. This, in addition to the other stuff I've been reading, helping me get a handle on ancient Mesopotamia. This book references the myths of Mesopotamia a lot. Again, it doesn't portray them as being real, but it portrays them as something that people believe in. So they are constantly referencing the myths of Mesopotamia, telling them to each other, reflecting on them. And so as a result of that, as I'm reading Before the Muses, which I've been reading alongside this book, I'm able to recognize some of the names of the ancient heroes in some of these myths, because I've been seeing them referenced in this book. So I have learned some useful stuff from this. It's not terrible, but yeah, the last 100 pages, I was bored. I was ready to be done. So that's my review. Thank you very much, BookTube.